From the Times and the Sunday Times, this is The Story. I'm Manveen Rana.
There was just utter jubilation, celebrations, champagne being sprayed.
That was less than 2 months ago, in October. Scenes of joy and relief spread across the streets of Israel after the American peace plan was signed, a ceasefire came into effect, and Hamas released the remaining hostages.
The deal signed, and almost overnight the hostages are returning and they're alive, and all 20 of them came back standing on their feet. I was at Hostage Square for almost all of those releases that were broadcast live on this very large screen to thousands of people. It was a very special moment, and I'll remember it forever.
It seemed that finally peace might be at hand, but the hope didn't last long.
Well, many feared this would happen. The ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas short-lived. It has been only 9 days.
The Israeli military is carrying out a series of airstrikes inside Gaza after Hamas attacked Israeli soldiers near the city of Rafah.
The tenuous ceasefire has been broken repeatedly, and now a political scandal in Israel could change the course of peace talks.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has asked the president to pardon him from corruption charges. He denies the allegations, which he describes as a witch hunt.
So where does this leave the peace plan? Is Israel actually prepared to accept a two-state solution? The UN General Assembly met yesterday to discuss what that could look like.
There is a difference between a ceasefire and making peace. And right now we're in a ceasefire. I'm not sure how we're going to be able to move forward from this.
The story today: what happened to Trump's Gaza peace plan? Gabby, in the normal way, would you mind just starting by introducing yourself?
My name's Gabrielle Weiniger. I cover the war in Gaza and on Israel's borders, including Lebanon and Syria. I've been doing that since October 2023 and the Hamas-led attacks on southern Israel. So that's just over 2 years of war, really, that I've been covering for the Times.
Gabby, take us back to the peace plan. Just remind us of what was actually set out, what looked like it would give us a roadmap to some kind of longer lasting peace.
So this is a big, big day, a beautiful day, potentially one of the great days ever in civilization.
So the 20-point plan was all about disarming Hamas. It was about Israel withdrawing from the territory that it's occupied in Gaza.
The plan that we put forward today is focused on ending the war immediately, getting all of our hostages back, getting everything back.
The White House basically gave a map that showed the Gaza Strip, and it showed it in different sections, and it showed where Israel was supposed to withdraw to, which they called the yellow line. That's the first withdrawal line. The Israeli military are therefore stationed all along that so-called yellow line, which wasn't demarcated in any way in its earliest days, in October and November, for example. So Palestinians weren't able to know what's a conflict zone, what's a dangerous area, where they can cross. That wasn't marked. It's been marked a little bit more in recent weeks. They've put poles, signs, barbed wire, demarcating that line a bit better. But that's essentially what the yellow line is, where you've got Israeli troops to the west of the line, further away from the coast and towards the Israeli border, and Hamas essentially in control of everything that's east of that line. And as the plan went on, it kind of got a bit more vague as to what the roadmap was, but it does mention, and this was ratified by a UN resolution as well, it mentioned the creation of a Palestinian state. It was ultimately supposed to see Gaza be taken over first by an international force, international stabilization force known as the ISF, which would be comprised of different countries donating their troops. And that hasn't happened. No one's volunteered to come forward and take over Gaza. So it's left it in this almost like this power vacuum where Hamas is still in control of around 50% and Israel's in control of the other 50%. And skirmishes are happening over that yellow line on a daily basis.
So Trump came up with this 20-point peace plan. It was supposed to be the answer. Just remind us of sort of the reaction in both Gaza and Israel at the time.
I think at the time, both nations on both sides, in Gaza and in Israel, were just so relieved to hear that the war was over and this long-awaited ceasefire, which had been debated and we'd been inching towards for such a long time, had finally happened. When the ceasefire was announced and Donald Trump came to Israel, all of that meant so much to the civilians who've been waiting for this to end.
After so many years of unceasing war and endless danger, today the skies are calm, the guns are silent, the sirens are still, and the sun rises on a holy land that is finally at peace, a land and a region that will live, God willing, in peace for all eternity.
Gabby, at the time when the plan was announced, there was a lot of international relief too. Just remind us about how it was effectively ratified by the international community.
2 weeks ago, the UN ratified the 20-point peace plan that Donald Trump put forward and that was agreed upon indirectly by Israel and Hamas. And it was almost taken into international consensus in that way, the fact that it was agreed upon by the UN. I think that it shows that there is support for this ceasefire, but it's almost like a verbal agreement. Where is the tangible support? Where are the troops that are needed to manage Gaza? Where are the funds that are needed to rehabilitate and rebuild Gaza? All of those questions are unanswered. So it's a bit of a lip service rather than an actual assistance in making the ceasefire become peace.
And I mean, what is the status of that plan? Beyond the ceasefire, are any of the components of what the roadmap would look like, are any of them happening?
Yeah, I think we can say that more crossings have been opened. There are 3 or 4 crossings currently open. There are still more, particularly Rafah, between Egypt and Gaza, that need to be opened, particularly because those are the places where the emergency medical cases are taken and more aid can come in. But Israel has withdrawn from parts of the Gaza Strip. It's withdrawn to the yellow line, and that is a big deal. They're trying to bring back the previous aid mechanisms, for example, the UN bringing in food, the WHO, all of those large organizations which were in charge of aid distribution in Gaza for decades. They're coming back into the fore. And I think that is important, taking it out of Israel's control and out of the Gaza Humanitarian Fund's control, because that just didn't work and it was actually deadly and dangerous. The situation is better than it was a couple of months ago. We're not having mass airstrikes on a daily basis, morning, noon, and night. The airstrikes are limited. They are still causing deaths. There's no doubt about it. There are over 300 people that have been killed since the start of the ceasefire in October. There is so much more to happen. The situation is still so dire. And then, of course, we have these worsening weather conditions and the damaged infrastructure.
Gabby, we're recording with you hours before the UN General Assembly meets again to discuss Gaza. Do we know what's on the agenda? What are we expecting from that meeting?
So there are 2 resolutions that they'll be voting on today. One relates to the recognition of the state of Palestine, which, of course, we've seen pick up momentum and gather speed over the last few months with the recognition of many EU countries in their recognition of the Palestinian Authority and the umbrella group of the PLO as the official representatives of the state of Palestine. Of course, a lot of that is a symbolic move. There are no agreed upon borders for the state of Palestine. There is no agreed upon capital. It's not a 2-state solution. It's a push forward for the Palestinian Authority to strengthen them in this time, specifically against Hamas. So they're voting on a resolution relating to that. And then there's another resolution today that's relating to Israel's continued occupation of the Syrian Golan Heights. Of course, Israel entered into southern Syria after the fall of President Bashar al-Assad. Syria, of course, wants to see its sovereignty. They want to see its sovereignty respected. And the fact that Israel is still occupying parts of that, including the strategic Mount Hermon, which gives them almost a view directly into the capital of Damascus. It's a very high point. It's a real strategic gain for Israel to currently hold that, and it's going to take quite a lot for them to give it up. It's not the only place that they're occupying as well, and the UN is annoyed by this, and they want to talk about it.
You mentioned that the violence has continued since the ceasefire began. It does feel like the war hasn't completely ended. Just give us a state of the conflict.
Yes. Over 300 Palestinians have been killed since the start of the ceasefire. There are still bodies buried under the rubble. We have a situation where people are still living in fear, still living in danger. There are Israeli incursions across the yellow line where Palestinians are also crossing the yellow line and being shot, maybe not knowing where the yellow line is. It's marked, but not everywhere. It's just not a safe place. There are unexploded ordinances all around. The medical system is still broken. The hospitals don't have enough equipment. There is not enough food and aid and supplies. It's not wartime, but it's not far from that either. It's still under attack, and it's still in a very, very dire and precarious situation. And we can see deaths on a daily basis.
And have people been allowed to go home in Gaza effectively?
Yes, in areas that are controlled by Hamas, people have freedom of movement. So it's not like we saw during the war where Israel had control of the Netzarim corridor, which essentially split Gaza in two, right across the belly of the Strip. And people who had fled south, because that was where the latest Israeli raids were in the north of Gaza and in Gaza City, of course, couldn't return to their homes in the north, which were largely destroyed anyway. Now people have gone home to the north. There was this mass exodus back to the northern areas, but they're living maybe in tents propped up on the rubbles of their former homes. It's not a safe way to live. It's not a hygienic way to live.
And what does Gaza look like now? I mean, obviously journalists can't get in still, but, how bad is the destruction?
From what we've seen, and the Times has been analysing aerial footage and things like that, there is still, the mass destruction doesn't describe it. It's a grey landscape of rubble. It's a moonscape. It's completely destroyed. We have been invited on embeds into the Gaza Strip. It's not the same thing as going as a free journalist into Gaza and talking with civilians and finding out what happened and visiting freely. So the only journalists that have gone in with the IDF and been shown whatever the IDF chooses to show them. That has never included conversations with Gazan civilians. So we rely on our local journalists, and we've had an incredible team in Gaza throughout the last 2 years who have put their lives in danger time and time again to get us stories and to bring us photographs and to speak to people who were afraid to speak out against Hamas, were afraid to speak out against Israel, were afraid to speak to their experience, and they've gone and got those stories for us and got those images for us so we can get an idea of what things look like. And there are places that have almost returned back to life in a small way. We can see markets reopening. We can see families reunited, but it's within this grey landscape of rubble and smoke.
And is enough aid getting in? Because we've had the UK government today saying it's still a problem.
There is so much more urgently to do. So we are continuing to urge the opening of all the crossings, the lifting of the restrictions, and the urgently needed delivery of humanitarian support for the people of Gaza.
I'll give you an example. I saw on social media there were a lot of Gazans complaining that gold-plated iPhone 17s have been allowed into Gaza and they're being sold in phone shops. But there is no basic food and medical supplies.
That's so bizarre.
So strange. They have no way to rebuild because there's no concrete. So while there are these luxury items, they have chocolate. They have new iPhones, but they don't have the basic things that they need to survive, because Israel says these are the things that Hamas will use to rebuild and regroup. and to take control and build themselves back to a fighting force.
But is basic things like food and concrete, which they'll need to be able to have homes again.
That's right. But that's where the international community is supposed to come in. And that's not what's happened. They're supposed to take over from Hamas. Hamas is supposed to disarm. Hamas have said they will never surrender, and that they would disarm perhaps on some kind of agreement, a Palestinian consensus, where their arms would go into the Palestinian police force and, a Palestinian authority of some kind. That doesn't look like it's going to happen.
Are they still effectively in control in Gaza?
Yes, it would be a mistake to think otherwise. They are the reigning force in the Gaza Strip. There are tribes and clans and, for example, the Abu Shabab tribe, who are supported by Israel and armed by Israel, who have control of certain areas around Rafah, for example. But Hamas are doing their best to quell any of that opposition. And we've seen executions on the street. We know how Hamas treats their enemies or those who go up against them and try and seize power. But they are very much in control of those areas, around 50% of the Gaza Strip where the IDF withdrew from.
Gabby, as part of the deal, the hostages were returned. Have all of the hostage bodies been returned now?
So that's right. The 20 hostages who were still living were all returned. There are still 2 bodies remaining in Hamas captivity. So around 20 have been returned via the Red Cross and identified in the Forensic Institute of Abu Kabir in central Israel. Israel is still waiting on 2 bodies. One of them is supposed to be handed over to Israel at some point on Tuesday. It could either be Rana. He's a 24-year-old patrol unit officer who was killed on October the 7th, and his body was taken into Gaza. And there is also a Thai foreign worker who was killed in Kibbutz Be'eri. He was also killed on that day, on October the 7th. So those are the 2 bodies that Israel is waiting for to be returned.
And what's the mood in Israel like now, since, the ceasefire has effectively come in?
It's better than it was during the war, particularly at the peak of the war. And I would say that was, of course, in the early days of 2023, but also during the Iran war. But there is an apprehension about what comes next, because nothing is solved. And we are in a situation in the region where we're almost stuck in the early days of that roadmap. And we're not moving forward towards what is purported to be the ultimate goal, which is a 2-state solution, which is a solution that Israel's government does not sign on. They're not going to give up land for peace anymore. That's not a formula that works for this government. And it's not a formula that works for a lot of the Israeli population who have been traumatized by not only by these 2 years of war, but by the October the 7th and what that represented. And what it represented for them was enemies who want to kill, maim, and massacre civilians who are living on their borders. They're not ready to give up those borders. They're not ready to give up strategic land. Israel isn't willing to engage in talks with the Palestinian Authority on peace because they don't want a 2-state solution. So there's a situation now where everything is just flat. There is no movement towards a better future.
Gabby, you've been reminding us of the state of the Trump peace plan, which was ratified by the UN 2 weeks ago, but feels like it's stagnating, really, in the Middle East. At the same time, Israeli politics has suddenly become very, very lively. There's been a huge development this week. Just remind us what's been happening.
Well, that's pretty classic, isn't it, the way you've put it? When you don't have an outside interference or something to unite the people internally, then you start to look inwards and you start to see all the things that are wrong with your own country. So Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been under a indictment for corruption, breach of trust and bribery since 2020. There have been cases against Netanyahu for around 20 years, but these are the cases that we're talking about right now. So he's facing 3 cases. The first, in case 1000, is a corruption charge where he's alleged to have received gifts, around $200,000 worth of gifts, including cigars and champagne, from Arneson, who's a Hollywood producer, and Australian billionaire James Packer. The second case is related to alleged meetings that Netanyahu had with someone called Arneson, who is the publisher of a major Israeli publication, the Yediot newspaper. The prosecutors are accusing Netanyahu of accepting favorable coverage in exchange for putting restrictions on rival publications, so breach of trust. And then there's the final case, which also involves a media organization, case 4000. So all of these 3 cases, bribery, breach of trust, and corruption. His trial has been ongoing throughout the war. The war has been a reason for his defense to excuse him from trials. And the trial was also moved from an open courtroom in Jerusalem to an underground courtroom in Tel Aviv because of the security situation. But US President Donald Trump, a couple of weeks ago, intervened and told the president of Israel to pardon the prime minister.
Hey, I have an idea. Mr. President, why don't you give him a pardon? This has been one of the greatest wartime presidents. And cigars and champagne, who the hell cares about that?
And Gabby, that was interesting because critics of Netanyahu have said that he's prolonged the war to keep himself in office. And Donald Trump saying, when he went to Israel quite openly, give the man a pardon. It did feel like it was almost part of the deal for getting a ceasefire in place.
When the US president addressed the Knesset, the Israeli parliament, it almost felt a little bit off the cuff when he said, and President Herzog, give the man a pardon. And I think the US president identifies in some way with what Netanyahu is going through, in the idea that there is a deep state left wing that is trying to bring down the more right-wing elements of a government. And that's what US President Donald Trump has signed on to. He's saying on social media and directly in a formal letter to the president, pardon this man and let him get on with the job. And I think because of that backing, we've seen Prime Minister Netanyahu really unusually come out and say, issue a formal letter to the president and say, grant me a pardon, without admitting any wrongdoing, which is really what a pardon is for. You can only be pardoned if you've done something wrong. But he's denied all the charges against him. And he's saying, give me a pardon and drop these charges immediately.
Dear citizens of Israel, time after time I have been elected in democratic elections. I have received your trust to act as Prime Minister of Israel first and foremost in order to fulfill these historic goals. It is for these reasons that today my lawyers have submitted a request for a pardon from the President of the state. I expect that anyone who has the country's best interests at heart will support this step.
And Gabby, in the past, he's always said he wouldn't even ask for a pardon because, as you say, he doesn't admit that he's done anything wrong. He denies all charges. So this is a real change.
I think he feels like he has the backing and he has the momentum to get this monkey off his back. And we're going into election a year now. So Netanyahu wants to get rid of the corruption charges. He wants to get rid of the October the 7th State Commission, which the public is requesting, and he's not initiating. And he wants to get rid of the ICC charges against him from the International Criminal Court, which accuses him of war crimes committed in Gaza. He wants to get these 3 issues out the way so that he can focus on being re-elected and reuniting his country under his wing. But he wants to stay on top. This is a man who is the great political survivor. He does not want to give up his power. And he certainly doesn't want to admit wrongdoing and face the potential of a plea bargain or, of course, going to prison.
And Gabby, how much does this political and legal decision, how much does the fate of Netanyahu impact the future of Gaza?
Massively. It's the future of the country. It's the future of whether or not there's a peace process. If he doesn't get this pardon, it's not the end of the world for Netanyahu. He will carry on. He has carried on throughout multiple accusations and multiple trials. This could drag on till 2030. The current status of the trial is that we're only finishing the cross-examination of case 1000, the first case. There are still 2 more cases, and we haven't even heard from the prosecution side yet. So there's a very, very long road ahead, and Bibi's career doesn't depend on it. Whoever leads Israel will determine Israel's fate. It is interesting because a lot of the army brass and the intelligence brass, particularly former leaders of the intelligence community and former army chief of staffs, you can see them being quite left-leaning in the way that they do support a two-state solution. Also former prime ministers, Ehud Barak, Ehud Olmert, when they speak to the Times and other media, we see that they fully support two-state solution. That means 2 nations living side by side based on the pre-1967 borders before the Israeli occupation of the West Bank. Netanyahu doesn't represent that. He represents something very, very different. It doesn't mean that he won't change his mind. We've seen him agree to a two-state solution once before, not agree, but mention that he would support it. He will, as long as he's on top, as long as he's in power, he will be in a coalition with whoever will support his rule. And we've seen him have different bedfellows over the decades that he's been in power. So whoever leads Israel will determine its direction and will determine whether or not there will be peace based on a two-state solution or peace by force.
As things stand, is he likely to win the next election?
The polls say yes, but it depends which polls you trust. He is certainly the strongest candidate. When you look at the rivals that he has, we have, of course, seen the Israeli public come out massively against this government, particularly during the war, saying that Netanyahu's torpedoing hostage deals. But we're in a different situation now. For all the talk that the peace plan hasn't moved forward, the war is, for all intents and purposes, at the moment over, and it will probably be in a low burn over for the coming months. I think the calculations have changed, and I'm not sure that Israel feels that there is a suitable replacement for Benjamin Netanyahu. He's all the society have known for such a long time, and I think it wouldn't be shocking if he took the next election.
And Gabby, if that carries on, it feels like it'll be a continuation of where we are now. Nothing seems to be moving, as you said, with the peace plan. Is there a sense that the Trump administration has slightly checked out? Are they still invested in this?
We saw so much hubbub around the ceasefire deal and pomp and circumstance and celebration about the deal and Trump coming to Israel and speaking to Israeli parliament for the first time since George Bush, and this long 2-hour speech talking about how he gave Bibi all the weapons that he asked for and what a good job Netanyahu had done in the war.
We make the best weapons in the world, and we've got a lot of them. And we've given a lot to Israel, frankly. I mean, Bibi would call me so many times, can you get me this weapon, that weapon, that weapon? Some of them I never heard of, Bibi, and I made them.
And there was really a sense of hope, I think, also in Gaza and also in Israel, but that has dissipated. The focus is certainly now on Ukraine. That's where the attention is right now. And we can see that with our media coverage as well. I write a lot about Israel and Gaza, but a lot less than I did a couple of months ago because the attentions are elsewhere. Steve Witkoff is not here. He's not talking to the hostage families anymore. It doesn't mean that it's over. And I think things come in cycles, and Israel's not something that will ever fully drop out of the headlines, and therefore it won't ever fully drop out of Trump's vision either. But there isn't a massive push right now to move forward. I think it's really, really stuck in the mud, and there is no leader in the Israeli side or in the Palestinian side that is able to unstick what has been so heavily entrenched for so many decades.
That was Gabrielle Weiniger, the Times correspondent in Israel. The producers today were Micaela, Arneson and Olivia Case, The executive producer was Taryn Siegel, and sound design and theme composition were by Mal Assetto. If you can, do leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening. We'll be back tomorrow.